Every autumn, somewhere in this country, a homeowner walks into the backyard with a saw and destroys one of the most useful wild plants in North America. And they do it on purpose. A neighbor warned them. An internet article told them to. Or the name alone just sounded dangerous. The shrub they are killing grows tall clusters of deep red cones, and those cones taste like cold lemonade straight off the branch. Crushed and dried, they become the tart, ruby-colored spice that gives Middle Eastern cooking its signature tang. 400 years ago, wealthy English gardeners paid serious money to grow this exact American plant as a prized ornamental. It still grows wild, for free, across more than 30 states. So why do so many Americans look at it and reach for a chainsaw? The answer is one word: Sumac, and a case of mistaken identity almost 4 centuries in the making. Because the shrub being cut down is Staghorn sumac, and nearly everything most people believe about it is wrong. Welcome to nature's lost vault. This story does not start with a chainsaw. It starts with a name that 2 very different plants were unlucky enough to share. Poison sumac is a real and genuinely dangerous plant. The blistering rash it leaves behind can be even worse than poison ivy, so the fear is not invented out of thin air. But here is where the trouble begins. Poison sumac and staghorn sumac are not the same plant. They are not even close, and the only thing they truly share is half of a name. They do sit in the same broad plant family, the one botanists call Anacardiaceae. That family also includes cashews, mangoes, and pistachios. It includes poison ivy, too. So somewhere along the line, the logic became simple, and simply wrong. Sumac sounds like poison sumac. Poison sumac is related to poison ivy. Therefore, all sumac must be trouble. Think about that for a second. We learned to throw out the cashew because it had a difficult cousin. And once a fear like that takes hold, it gets passed down like a family recipe, from a cautious parent to a cautious child, until nobody remembers where it started. And here is the detail almost everyone misses. Telling these 2 plants apart is not hard. It might be the easiest plant identification you will ever make in your life. Staghorn sumac holds its berries in tight, upright cones, deep crimson, pointed toward the sky like little torches. The young branches are covered in soft fuzz, the same velvet you would feel on a deer's antler, which is exactly where the staghorn name comes from. In the fall, its long, feathery leaves turn a brilliant scarlet you can spot from a moving car. It favors dry, sunny, open ground, the roadsides, field edges, and old pastures. The bright, well-drained places that bake in full summer sun. Poison sumac does the opposite of all of that. Its berries are white or a pale gray-green, and they hang down loose and drooping, never standing up. Its stems are smooth with no fuzz at all, and it will only grow with its feet wet in swamps, bogs, and standing water. So if you are on dry land at the edge of a road, you are almost certainly not looking at poison sumac at all. The whole rule fits in a single breath. Red cones standing up on dry ground, safe. White berries drooping down in a swamp, leave it be. That is the entire test. Whole generations cut down a harmless, useful shrub because nobody ever taught them the part that takes 10 seconds to learn. Most people never heard this next part of the history. Long before anyone feared this plant, the native people of this continent treasured it. Native nations from the Cherokee to the Ojibwe to the Iroquois used staghorn sumac as food and as medicine for centuries. They soaked the red cones in cool water to make a tart, rose-colored drink, so close to lemonade that early settlers called it Indian lemonade and drank it all through the summer heat. The ethnobotanist Daniel Moorman, who spent decades documenting how Native Americans used wild plants, recorded Staghorn sumac in roll after roll, from a cooling beverage to a wash for sore throats. And the tartness you taste is real chemistry. The surface of each berry is coated in malic acid and ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is vitamin C. Sailors and frontier families leaned on sour wild fruits like this one to hold off scurvy when fresh food ran out. The dried cones kept their tang for months, which made them a quiet kind of insurance against a long winter. Now here is the irony that should sting a little. While Americans were learning to fear it, Europeans were paying handsomely to plant it. By the time the English herbalist John Parkinson was cataloguing garden plants in 1629, this American shrub was already a prized ornamental across the wealthy gardens of England, grown for its torch-like cones and its blazing autumn color. A century later, the great botanist Carl Linnaeus gave it its formal scientific name, Rhus typhina, in the 1750s. The plant your neighbor wants to cut down today was once a status symbol in the finest gardens of London. And those red cones do far more than make a drink. This is where the story leaves the backyard and lands squarely on your dinner plate. If you have ever eaten za'atar, that earthy, tangy spice blend dusted over warm, flat bread and roasted vegetables all across the Middle East, then you have already tasted sumac. The bright, lemony note in that blend comes from dried, ground sumac berries. The spice you buy in the jar usually comes from a Mediterranean cousin in the very same genus, but the Staghorn sumac growing wild on the American roadside carries that same sharp, tart flavor. Cooks dust the deep red powder over hummus, over grilled meats, over rice and roasted vegetables, both for the tang and for that gorgeous color. So picture this. People drive to the grocery store and pay a premium for a small imported jar, while the same flavor sits ignored on the shrub they have been trying to bulldoze out of the yard. It also happens to be one of the more antioxidant-rich spices on that shelf, which is why the rest of the world never stopped using it. For most of American history, none of this was a secret, and none of it was special. It was simply ordinary. Staghorn sumac was the plain, everyday shrub at the edge of the field. Its bark and leaves are heavy with tannins, and tanners once used it to cure leather, while dyers used it to set color into cloth. Nobody wrote songs about it. It was just there, useful, reliable, standing quietly at the corner of every dry lot in the country. And maybe that is how a plant slips out of memory. Not with a government ban, and not with a scandal, but with a slow, collective shrug. One generation at a time, until all that is left is the half of the name that frightened people. So let's bring it home, because making that famous lemonade is genuinely simple. You want the deep red cones from late summer into early fall, and you want to pick them on a dry day, because a hard rain washes away the tart coating that holds all of the flavor. Snap off a few cones, break them apart into a jar of cool or room temperature water. Let them soak for 10 to 20 minutes, and you will watch the water slowly blush a deep pink. Then strain it through a coffee filter or a clean cloth which catches the fine little hairs, and sweeten it however you like. One piece of advice matters more than any other here. Use cool water, never boiling. Hot water drags the bitter tannins out of the plant and turns your bright lemonade harsh and mouth-puckering. Cold steeping keeps it clean and tart, the same way native families made it for generations. And if you dry those cones and grind them, you have just made your own jar of that expensive imported spice. For nothing. Take only what you need and leave plenty of cones for the birds that lean on them through the winter. So go back to that homeowner with the saw, The plant they were about to destroy makes a free summer drink rich in vitamin C. It carries the very flavor people pay good money for in a jar, and it once stood proud in the finest gardens of Europe. The only thing ever truly wrong with it was a name it never chose for itself. This season, when the leaves begin to turn and you spot those brilliant red cones standing tall along a dry roadside, you will know exactly what you are seeing. Not a threat, a glass of lemonade that has been waiting on the branch the whole time. If this vault changed how you see the wild plants in your own world, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and stay close. There is a whole continent of forgotten plants still out there, and the next one will be waiting for you right here. You have almost certainly eaten this plant, and there is a good chance you have grown it yourself, because millions of Americans put it in the ground every single summer. And yet the single most valuable part of it, the part your body would genuinely thank you for, most of those gardeners throw straight into the trash, not because it is poisonous and not because it is hard to reach, but simply because nobody ever told them it was food. Right now, in a market in Taipei, this exact green is selling out before noon. In a kitchen in Kampala, it is simmering on the stove for dinner. And in Okinawa, it has grown for centuries in the gardens of some of the longest living people ever recorded. But here in America, that same green gets fed to the hogs. We kept the root, and we never so much as tasted the leaves. This is the sweet potato. Not the root you already know, but the leaves you have been growing and quietly wasting your entire life. The answer starts with something almost nobody realizes about the plant itself, which is that the sweet potato is not really a potato at all. It is a morning glory, a close cousin of those trumpet-shaped flowers that climb fence and mailboxes all summer long, and it grows exactly the way you would expect a morning glory to grow. You put a single rooted cutting in the ground in late spring, and within a few weeks, the vines are running across the soil in every direction, dropping new roots wherever a stem touches down and pushing out broad, heart-shaped leaves from every growing tip. What that means is that the plant is quietly doing two jobs at the same time. Below the ground, it is swelling into the dense, sweet root you buy at the store, and above the ground it is producing a fresh crop of edible greens for months on end. One planting gives you two harvests and two completely different foods, which leaves a rather strange question hanging over every American garden. If this plant hands you two crops for the price of one, why did this whole country learn to eat only half of it? Hold on to that question for a moment, because the answer says far more about the American food system than it does about the plant. And if you happened to grow up on a farm, you may already know exactly where those vines ended up, out at the hog pen. Your parents and grandparents got very little wrong when it came to growing their own food, but on this one particular plant, the whole country somehow got it backward. Because everywhere else that the sweet potato genuinely feeds people, the leaves are not treated as a throwaway at all. They are the vegetable. In Taiwan, sweet potato greens sit in every produce market and get stir-fried with garlic and a splash of sesame oil as an ordinary weeknight side dish. In Japan and Korea, the tender young leaf tips go straight into soups and hot pans. And across Uganda and much of East Africa, they are simmered down as a staple green that has fed families for generations, with no ceremony and no special name attached to them. The World Vegetable Center in Taiwan, an institution that researches exactly these kinds of crops for a living, has spent years promoting sweet potato leaves as one of the most nutritious greens a household can grow. And on top of all that, the plant carries one more quiet advantage that made it genuinely priceless, which is that it keeps right on producing through brutal heat, through the monsoon rains, and even through standing floodwater. Sheikh Nazrul Islam, a Bangladeshi food scientist who built much of his career studying this single plant, documented what that really means. After a typhoon or a flood has torn through and taken every other crop with it, sweet potato leaves are sometimes the only fresh greens a village has left. When everything else has drowned, this plant is still standing, and it is still making food. That is not a side dish. That is the line between eating and going hungry. So what exactly has America been feeding to its pigs all this time? The easiest place to start is the comparison every gardener already understands, which is spinach. In Islam's research, and in a long line of studies that have followed it, sweet potato leaves come out roughly even with spinach, and, in several respects, comfortably ahead of it, whether you are measuring protein, iron, vitamin K, folate, or the sheer range of antioxidant compounds they carry. And they manage all of that without the harsh, mineral bitterness that makes raw spinach and kale an acquired taste for a lot of people. They also bring beta-carotene, the same pigment that makes the orange root so valuable, along with vitamin C, a handful of B vitamins, calcium, and magnesium. But the figure that tends to stop people is the one for antioxidants. Polyphenols are the plant compounds behind the whole reputation of things like grapeseed extract, the sort of thing the supplement aisle bottles up and sells in small, expensive containers. When Chinese food scientists actually measured the polyphenol content of sweet potato leaves, they found it at 7 to 9 times the level found in grape seeds, 7 to 9 times the antioxidant load of a bottled supplement, sitting on a vine in a backyard garden in the middle of July, completely free. And the leaves reach well beyond antioxidants. Chlorogenic acid and the caffeoyl quinic acids, both of which are concentrated in the leaf, have shown activity that lowers blood glucose in laboratory research. A clinical study in Taiwan, published in a gastroenterology journal, even found that eating purple sweet potato leaves supported the immune system, including the activity of the body's natural killer cells. None of this is garden folklore or backyard mythology. It has been measured, named, and printed in the scientific literature, and almost none of it ever reached the American kitchen. Which brings us right back to the question we left hanging earlier. If the leaves are genuinely this good, and the plant grows them for free, how on earth did an entire country teach itself to throw them away? And the honest answer is that there is no single villain to point at here. No company hid the leaves from anyone, no agency ever banned them, and no law was ever written against them. What happened is quieter than a ban, and in its own way it was far more thorough. The food system that hardened into place across America after the Second World War was built around a short list of crops that could be shipped long distances, stored for months, and sold at enormous scale. Corn, soybeans, and wheat took the research money, the shelf space, and the cultural spotlight. And the sweet potato root fit neatly into that system because it cures hard. It holds for months in a cool cupboard without any electricity, and it survives a long haul to a distant store. The sweet potato leaf, on the other hand, fits none of it. It wilts within a day or two of being cut, and it simply cannot be crated across a country or left sitting on a shelf. So the system did the only thing it knew how to do with something it could not sell, which was to treat that leaf as worth nothing at all. In the American South, the vines went straight over the fence to the hogs, the throwaway left behind once the valuable roots had been dug. And a whole generation of gardeners quietly absorbed a lesson that nobody ever actually said out loud. The lesson that the leaf was not food. Some of the poorer families cooked the greens anyway, out of thrift and plain good sense. But that habit stayed local, passed quietly from hand to hand, and it never once made it into the national idea of what a sweet potato was. The knowledge did survive, though. It survived in Appalachian gardens that never fully handed their food over to the grocery store, and it survived in immigrant kitchens from Taiwan, from Korea, and from across West and East Africa, where cooking the leaves was simply what a family did. The plant itself kept growing in American backyards the entire time, right where it always had. The only thing that ever really went missing was the knowing. And this is where all of that history turns into something you can actually put on a plate this year. If you grow sweet potatoes, or you happen to know a neighbor who does, then you already have this crop sitting in the ground. You are simply not harvesting it. Once the vines begin to run in early summer, all you do is cut the growing tips, roughly the top 10 to 15 centimeters of each vine, young leaves and all, about once a week. And here is the part that feels almost unfair. Cutting those tips does not set the plant back in the slightest. It actually makes the plant branch, and every new branch sends out more vines, and more vines mean even more tips for you to cut the following week. The more of this green you take, the more the plant hands you in return. So right through July, August, and September, you are pulling a fresh bowl of greens out of the very same bed you planted for its roots, with no extra ground, no extra water, and not a single extra dollar spent. In the kitchen, the leaves behave like a gentler, sweeter spinach. You can give them a few minutes in a hot pan with garlic, or drop them into a soup right at the end, or stew them down soft with onion and tomato. They are mild, just a little sweet, and perfectly happy to carry whatever seasoning you bring to them. And if you do not grow the plant yet, honestly, the way in is almost too simple to believe. You take a single sweet potato from the grocery store, sit it half submerged in a jar of water on a warm, sunny windowsill, and within 2 to 3 weeks, it will start pushing out green shoots. You twist those shoots off, stand them in water for a few days until they root, and then plant them outside once your last frost has passed. That one grocery store root becomes a dozen plants, and that dozen plants becomes a whole summer of greens and an autumn of roots, all of it starting from a single jar on a single windowsill. So picture that compost heap one more time, out in the yard in October, those sweet potato vines slowly going soft on top of the pile, the very ones this country has tossed out for 100 years without ever giving them a second thought. Every single one of them was carrying the same green that a market in Taipei sells out of by noon, the same one a family in Kampala cooks for dinner, the same one that grew in the gardens of the longest living people ever recorded. The plant was never actually hiding anything from us. It held those leaves out in the open every summer in millions of backyards to anyone who simply knew enough to reach for them. The only thing that was ever really missing is the knowing. And now you have it. There is a flower coming up through the cracks in your driveway and along the edge of your lawn right now, and most people in this country spend money and effort every spring trying to kill it. Almost none of them know what they are destroying. A single cup of its leaves carries more than a full day's worth of vitamin A, more than you would get from a plate of raw spinach, along with calcium, iron, and one of the richest supplies of vitamin K found anywhere in the plant kingdom. Its root recently reached a human clinical trial for cancer at a Canadian university. So why were you taught to poison it? This story begins on a lawn with a plant you have known your entire life and were taught to hate. Taraxacum officinale. The dandelion, the most hunted plant in America, and one of the most useful things that will ever grow in your yard. You already know it on sight, the jagged leaves that gave it its name, from the old French Dandelion, the tooth of the lion, the hollow stem that bleeds a little white milk when you snap it, the gold flower head that closes at dusk and opens again with the morning sun. For most of human history, no one would have understood the urge to spray it. They would have eaten it. The young leaves are among the most nutrient-dense greens ever measured, and they cost nothing. Pick them in spring before the flower opens, while the bitterness is still mild, and you have a salad that outperforms almost anything sold in the produce aisle. The root, dried and roasted, makes a dark drink that tastes remarkably like coffee, with none of the caffeine. Households did exactly that through the Civil War and both World Wars, whenever real coffee was scarce. And the plant has a second talent the French named it for. They call it pissenlit, which politely translated means wet the bed, because the leaves are a gentle, reliable diuretic. That is not folklore. The German Commission E, the expert panel that reviews herbal medicines for the German government, approves the leaf for exactly that, and approves the root for poor appetite and sluggish digestion. And for an audience that thinks about failing eyesight and thinning bones, the rest of that nutrition is not a footnote. The vitamin A in these leaves is the kind that protects aging eyes. The vitamin K is what helps your body hold calcium in the bone instead of losing it. You have been mowing down a tonic aimed squarely at the things that tend to go wrong after 60. But here is the detail almost everyone has missed. This was never fringe. The physicians of the Arab world were prescribing it in the 10th and 11th centuries. Chinese and Indian doctors had been growing it to treat the liver and the gut far longer than that. The Greek naturalist Theophrastus described it more than 2,000 years ago. And when the Puritans and the colonists who followed crossed the Atlantic, they did not find this plant waiting for them. They brought it with them, on purpose, packed alongside their seeds and their tools, because to them it was food and it was medicine, and you did not sail into an unknown continent without your medicine. It stayed medicine in America for a very long time. A preparation called the compound elixir of Taraxacum was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia, the official national catalogue of recognized drugs, from 1888 all the way to 1965. Think about that for a second. For 77 years, the plant your neighbors now poison sat in the same drug book your doctor's medicines came out of. The European Medicines Agency still recognizes its traditional use today. So does the European Scientific Cooperative on Phytotherapy, which certifies the root as a restorer of liver and bile function. Half the modern world never stopped treating this as a useful plant. So what changed here? The answer has almost nothing to do with the plant, and everything to do with a chemical and an idea. The chemical came out of the Second World War. Researchers on secret weapons programs developed a compound known as 2,4-D, hoping to starve enemy nations by destroying their crops. It failed at that, but it turned out to do something else with ruthless efficiency. It killed broadleaf plants while leaving grasses untouched. In 1945, it went on sale, and within a few years, a company you know, Scott's, was selling it to American families mixed right into their lawn fertilizer with a single promise: a perfect uniform carpet of green, with nothing else allowed to live in it. That was the part the advertising never said out loud. The flawless lawn was not some old American tradition. It was sold to people lot by lot in the new suburbs after the war. And in that picture, a gold flower head in the grass no longer meant free food and free medicine. It meant a lazy homeowner. One plant became a small social failure that you paid a chemical company to remove from your yard. The global market for these lawn herbicides is now worth more than $40 billion a year. Companies like Bayer and Corteva still sell formulas aimed directly at this one plant. You would think, with all that effort, the plant must be dangerous, or at least useless. It is neither. And here is the part that explains everything. You cannot patent a dandelion. It grows for free, anywhere, for anyone, and it has been reproducing on its own for millions of years. There is no version of it a corporation can own, no annual seed you are forced to rebuy, no prescription to fill. A plant that supports your liver and feeds you for nothing is a terrible business. A chemical that kills it every spring, sold to you again and again, season after season, is one of the best business models ever invented. But the picture of this plant as a simple nuisance is not the full story either. And this is where it turns from history into something happening right now. In the University of Windsor in Ontario, a biochemist named Dr. Sayaram Pandey spent years studying the ordinary dandelion root. Working with Dr. Caroline Ham, an oncologist at the Windsor Regional Cancer Centre, and researchers at the University of Ottawa, his team published findings in the medical journal Oncotarget. In the laboratory, a simple water extract of the root triggered programmed cell death in cancer cells, the body's own self-destruct process, while leaving the healthy cells around them unharmed. The formula they used was roughly 5 times stronger than anything sold over the counter, and in those tests it had already shown activity against leukemia, melanoma, and pancreatic cancer cells. Pandey described the effect as strikingly selective. It went after the cancer and left the healthy tissue alone. Those results were strong enough that in 2012, Health Canada approved a Phase 1 human trial, the first careful test of safety in people. It opened to 30 patients with late-stage blood cancers who had run out of other options, and the work was dedicated to a young man who had died of leukemia and whose family helped fund the research. Honesty matters here, because this channel does not sell you miracles. A Phase 1 trial is only the first step, and as of today, the full results have never been published. What the science shows for certain is narrower and stranger. In the dish and in animals, a free root from your backyard did something a great many expensive compounds cannot. The human chapter is still unfinished, but it was real enough to carry a lawn plant into a modern cancer ward. Which brings us back to your lawn. Half the world still eats this plant without a second thought. In Italy and Greece, the bitter spring greens go straight into the cooking. Across the Middle East and much of Asia, it never left the kitchen or the medicine shelf. Only here, in the land of the perfect lawn, was it handed to us as the enemy. And it could not be easier to recognize once you actually look. Low rosettes of jagged, toothed leaves growing flat from a single center. A smooth, hollow stalk with that thin white milk inside. One gold flower head for each stem, never in clusters. The one that becomes the soft gray seed globe children blow into the wind. There is nothing else in your yard that looks quite like it. So this spring, before you reach for the sprayer, try the opposite. Pick the young leaves and eat them. Dig a root, roast it, and brew it. Leave the flowers for the bees, who need them early in the year when almost nothing else is open. And tell one other person what you now know. Because the most valuable thing on your property was never the lawn. It was the gold flower the lawn was designed to destroy. Conservation crews haul it out of the woods by the truckload. State agencies have placed it on noxious plant lists in more than 30 states. Volunteers give up their spring weekends to rip it out of the ground by the thousands. And plenty of parks hand homeowners a bottle of herbicide and tell them to spray it on site. The order is blunt. Destroy this plant wherever you find it. And ecologically, they are right to want it gone. The tragedy of this invasion is not the plant. It is how we chose to fight it. Because the same plant we are spraying off the forest floor is one of the most nutritious leafy greens growing anywhere in North America. A free source of vitamin A and vitamin C, the base of a pesto people happily pay for in good restaurants. This story does not start in an American forest. It starts in a clay cooking pot on the shore of the Baltic Sea, almost 6,000 years ago. In 2013, archaeologist Hayley Saul and her colleagues published a study in the journal PLOS One. They had scraped the charred residue from inside Stone Age pottery and found the microscopic glass skeletons left behind by plant cells, called phytoliths. The shapes matched one plant, a leaf that tastes of both garlic and mustard, chosen for nothing but its flavor. It was the oldest direct evidence of a spice ever found in European cooking. The plant was garlic mustard, Alliaria petiolata, and people have been eating it on purpose since before the first pyramids were built. For thousands of years it stayed a prized kitchen herb. In England they called it sauce alone and Jack by the hedge, and they pounded the leaves into a sharp green sauce for salt fish and roast lamb. Cooks reached for it the way we reach for garlic today. The young taproot, pulled in early spring, has the clean, clearing burn of horseradish. So when European settlers crossed the ocean, they carried it with them on purpose, as food and as a folk medicine, rubbed onto sores and brewed for the chest the way every useful plant traveled then. The earliest record of garlic mustard growing wild in America comes from Long Island, New York, in 1868. Someone planted it because they wanted it on the table. For a while it behaved. It stayed close to the dooryard gardens where it was planted. That did not last. Here is the detail almost everyone missed. The plant that was invited in did not stay put. Garlic mustard is a biennial. Its first year, it sits low to the ground as a small rosette of round, scalloped leaves, green right through the winter. Its second year, it throws up a stalk, opens clusters of little white flowers with 4 petals on each, and sets seed. A single plant can release thousands of seeds, sometimes close to 7,000, and those seeds can lie dormant in the soil for years before they sprout. It pushed out along trails, riverbanks, and deer paths into the deep, shaded floor of the eastern hardwood forest, a place almost nothing else from Europe had managed to invade. And the local deer would not touch it, so they grazed down its native competition and left the garlic mustard standing. That is where it began doing something that alarmed scientists. In 2006, ecologist Christina Stinson, working at the Harvard Forest, led a team that published in the journal PLOS Biology, and they had worked out how garlic mustard wins. Nearly every plant in a forest and almost every young tree seedling depends on a hidden web of fungi in the soil called mycorrhizae. The fungi wrap around the roots and trade water and minerals for sugar. It is a partnership hundreds of millions of years old. Garlic mustard releases chemicals from its roots that poison those fungi. It does not need them, so it quietly destroys the underground network that the maple and ash seedlings around it cannot live without. The native seedlings starve in the dark while the newcomer takes the light. Think about that for a second. It is not crowding the forest out. It is cutting the wiring, and the damage does not stop at the trees. There is a small native butterfly called the West Virginia white that for thousands of years laid its eggs only on native woodland mustards. Garlic mustard gives off almost the same chemical signal as those plants, so the female lands on it and lays her eggs on the wrong leaf. The caterpillars hatch, begin to feed, and die, because the plant that smelled like home is toxic to them. Scientists call that an evolutionary trap. The invader does not only outcompete the natives, it fools their insects into raising the next generation on a poison. By the early 2000s, garlic mustard was on invasive and noxious lists in more than 30 states. Parks and conservation groups built whole events around destroying it, and in some counties, volunteers clear tons of it in a single afternoon. Extension offices print step-by-step eradication guides. And the most common advice in those guides, once a patch grows large, is chemical. Glyphosate, triclopaia, the same families of spray sold by companies like Bayer and Corteva into a global herbicide market worth around $40 billion a year. Up to this point, garlic mustard had looked unstoppable. That was about to change, because the version you have heard is not the full picture. Something strange happens to this plant over time. Ecologist Richard Lankow and others went back to old infestations and measured the very chemicals the plant uses as its underground weapon. In the oldest stands, the ones that had ruled the same ground for decades, those chemicals had faded. The plant had, in effect, disarmed itself. The native soil fungi were creeping back. Long-term studies have watched dense carpets of garlic mustard thin out on their own after 15 or 20 years, a pattern ecologists now call boom and bust. If it had simply marched across the continent and never stopped, this would be a very different story. Instead, the forest pushes back, and the invader's great advantage turns out to come with an expiration date. Now pay attention to this next part, because it is the detail that turns the whole story around. While all of this was being fought with poison, almost nobody was saying out loud what garlic mustard actually is. It is food, genuinely good food. The leaves are loaded with vitamin A and vitamin C, along with vitamin E, fiber, and a long list of trace minerals. Ounce for ounce, the young leaves carry more vitamin C than a lot of the bagged greens sold in plastic at the store. They taste exactly like the name promises, somewhere between garlic and a mild mustard, green and sharp, and a little peppery. Older leaves and the spring stems turn bitter, so cooks blanch them or save them for the sauce pot. And the white flowers and slender green seed pods are good to eat too. And that early taproot still stands in for horseradish, just as it did in England 400 years ago. And here is the part that should stop anyone who has ever reached for the spray bottle. The single most effective way to control garlic mustard, the method conservation biologists themselves recommend before any chemical, is to pull the second-year plants by hand before they set seed and carry them away. Pull it before it seeds. That is the official, science-backed control plan. And that is what you do when you harvest it for dinner. You can fight this invasion with a fork. Every plant you take home to eat is one that will never drop its thousands of seeds into the woods. You would think the state parks would have led with that. For decades, almost nobody did. Why did it take so long for simple foraging to become part of the plan? Part of it is that we forgot how to see the wild world as a pantry. Faced with an invasion, our first instinct was a spray bottle, not a recipe. But there is also money in that instinct, and none in the alternative. Someone sells the herbicide. Someone wins the contract to clear the patch. Someone writes the restoration grant. Nobody profits when the answer is dinner. The leaf that flavored Europe's first sauces, that a Stone Age cook chose almost 6,000 years ago, became, on this side of the ocean, a target to be sprayed. In its first year, look for low rosettes of round leaves with scalloped edges, sitting green on the forest floor, even in the cold. In its second spring, it stands about knee-high, with triangular, sharply toothed leaves and small white flowers, 4 petals on each. The surest test is the easiest one. Crush a leaf between your fingers and smell it. If it smells like garlic, you have found it. Nothing else that looks like this carries that scent. Then harvest it the way the forest actually needs. Take the second-year plants in spring before the flowers turn into seed pods. Snip the tender young leaves for salads and for the pan. Blend a big handful with olive oil, nuts, a hard cheese, and a squeeze of lemon. And you have a jar of pesto that costs you nothing and beats the store. Dig a few roots for that horseradish bite. Then pull the flowering plants up whole, as many as you can reach, and bag the seed heads so they cannot spread. You are not only feeding yourself, you are doing the same work the volunteers are bussed in to do. Almost 6,000 years ago, someone stood over a clay pot and chose this leaf for its flavor. The pot lasted long enough for us to dig it up. The plant lasted long enough to cover half a continent. The only thing we lost along the way was the simple knowledge that it was ever dinner. Next time you walk past a patch of it at the edge of the woods, do not reach for the poison. Reach for a basket. Right now, somewhere in America, a man is paying good money to kill a plant his grandmother used to put in his sandwiches. He has a bottle of chemical spray in one hand and a patch of small arrow-shaped leaves at his feet. And he has been told those leaves are the enemy of a perfect lawn. He is half right. They are stubborn, they spread fast, and they do not care how much you spend to be rid of them. What he does not know is that the same little green he is about to poison was once steeped into the most secretive tea in North America, carried out of a Canadian clinic under guard, and argued over by cancer researchers for the better part of a century. One plant, two completely different worlds, and almost nobody who pulls it from the grass has any idea they are holding both at once. The plant is sheep sorrel. Go back 70 or 80 years before the American lawn became something you defended with synthetic chemicals, and this plant had a different name in most mouths. Sour grass, sour weed. Children pulled it up by the handful on the walk home from school and chewed the leaves for that sharp, lemony bite, the way other kids chewed gum. If you grew up before the 1960s, there is a decent chance you have tasted it and simply forgotten. Botanists call it Rumex acetosella. It belongs to the buckwheat family, the same line as rhubarb, and once you know the shape of it, you will never not see it again. A low rosette of leaves close to the ground, each one shaped like a tiny arrowhead, with two little lobes flaring out at the base. By summer, it sends up thin stalks tipped in a rusty red haze of tiny flowers, which is often the first thing people actually notice. Of all the wild sorrels scattered across this continent, none is as widespread or as common as this one. There is a reason it shows up exactly where it does. Sheep sorrel prefers the poor, acidic, hard-packed ground where lawn grass struggles. So a lawn losing the fight against it is really a lawn telling you something about its own soil. Think about that for a second. The thing sitting near the top of the most wanted list at every garden center is also one of the most available wild foods in the country, growing for free in the very spots we work hardest to control. And it is worth asking who taught us to work that hard, because the perfect American lawn is not an ancient tradition. It is younger than most of the people watching this. Before the Second World War, keeping a lawn clear of plants like this one meant getting down on your knees and pulling them by hand, season after season. Then the chemistry changed. In 1945, straight out of wartime research, a spray called Weed On reached the market, the first one that killed broadleaf plants while leaving the grass standing. Right behind it came the Scott's Company of Marysville, Ohio, with its own version and a 7-step program to sell you everything you needed, every single year. The company's chairman, Charles Mills, once summed up the whole philosophy in a single line. "Here at Scott's," he said, "we refuse to recognize virtue in weeds." That one idea, that a plant growing for free was a defect to be poisoned, became one of the most profitable habits in the country. Scott's alone now sells close to $5 billion of lawn and garden product a year, and homeowners pour more of it onto their grass, acre for acre, than farmers put on their fields. And once the ideal was sold, it got enforced. In neighborhoods across the country, a homeowners association can fine you, in writing, for letting this very plant grow where the turf is supposed to be. A free spring green, rewritten as a code violation. And here is the detail almost everyone missed while they were busy fighting it. It is food. Good food. That sour snap on your tongue comes from oxalic acid, the same compound that makes rhubarb pucker your face and gives spinach its faint metallic edge. In the kitchen, that tartness is a gift. A small handful of the young leaves, torn raw into a salad, does the work of a squeeze of lemon. Cooks who know the plant use it exactly that way, as a wild substitute for lemon or lime, anywhere a dish needs a bright, acidic lift. You can wilt a few leaves into a spring soup, fold them through scrambled eggs, or stir them into a pan of greens in the last seconds before you pull it off the heat. There is even an old trick where the juice is used to curdle milk, the first step toward a homemade cheese, and the root, dried and ground to a powder, has been stretched into noodles or worked into bread flour in lean years. One word of warning from anyone who has cooked it. Like most tender greens, it collapses to almost nothing in the pan, so if you mean to cook it down, gather far more than seems reasonable. This was never only a lawn nuisance. For most of human history, it was the pantry. But the leaves and roots were not only eaten, they were steeped. Long before anyone owned a kettle that whistled, sheep sorrel went into the pot as a plain infusion. A folk drink reached for to wake a dull appetite, or settle a heavy stomach after a long winter of salted meat. If you want to taste that for yourself, it could not be simpler. A small handful of fresh young leaves, torn and dropped into a cup of hot water for a few minutes, gives you a pale, lemony infusion you can sip warm or chill over ice on a hot afternoon with a little honey. Some people skip the heat entirely and steep the leaves in cold water in the refrigerator overnight, which keeps the color brighter and the flavor softer. It will not taste like anything off a grocery shelf. It tastes like a lemon that grew wild. And that humble cup is where the story takes its strangest turn, the part most people have never heard. In the 1920s, a Canadian nurse named Renee Case came into a 4-herb recipe, an old remedy, she said, traced back to a patient who had learned it from Ojibwe healers. She called the blend Essiac, which is simply her own last name spelled backward. Sheep sorrel was one of the 4 herbs at its heart. For decades, out of a small clinic in the town of Bracebridge, Ontario, Kais brewed that tea and gave it to people who had run out of other options, mostly free of charge. She spent years pushing the authorities to take her seriously, testifying, petitioning, keeping her doors open under official pressure, convinced she was sitting on something the medical world was too proud to examine. A legend grew up around her and her tea. Here is where the quiet truth matters more than the loud legend. When researchers finally put Essiac to the test, it did not hold up. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York ran experiment after experiment through the 1970s and 80s and found no anti-cancer activity. The National Cancer Institute tested it too and reached the same conclusion. The tea an entire underground believed in did not do what the legend promised. Case took the full recipe with her when she died in 1978. To this day, the major cancer centers are clear that there is no evidence it treats the disease, and that no one facing it should lean on a wild tea in place of real medical care. It is not the triumphant ending the legend wanted. It is the true one, and on this channel that has always counted for more. The plant never needed to be a miracle. It only ever needed to be what it actually is. Which brings us to the part you actually need before you pick any. That same oxalic acid that makes it delicious is also why you treat it with respect. In a salad-sized handful, for most people it is nothing to worry about. The trouble comes only with heavy, day-after-day amounts. In quantity, oxalic acid can tie up calcium and feed the formation of kidney stones, and it can aggravate gout and rheumatism, the kinds of things plenty of us are already managing. If you have a history of kidney stones or kidney trouble of any kind, this is one to enjoy rarely, or skip altogether. If you take a blood thinner, ask your doctor first, because the sorrels carry a mild anticoagulant effect. 2 simple habits make it gentler. Cook the leaves and pour off the water, which carries away a good share of the acid. And eat it alongside something rich in calcium, a little cheese or yogurt, which keeps your body from absorbing as much. The signs of too much are hard to miss. A tingling tongue, a bad headache, a sudden wave of nausea. And given everything we just covered, one more rule that should go without saying but does not. Never harvest from a lawn or a roadside that has been sprayed or treated. The same chemicals this plant shrugs off so easily are not something you want to carry home to your kitchen. Pick from clean, untreated ground you know. And one last identification note that matters more than any recipe. Sheep sorrel is not wood sorrel, the little clover-shaped plant people confuse it with. Learn the arrowhead leaf and never eat anything you cannot name with total certainty. So the next time you see a man out on his lawn, spray bottle in hand, going to war with a patch of small arrow-shaped leaves, you will know what he does not. That he is standing over a free spring salad, a wild lemon, a curdling agent for cheese, and the strangest cup of tea on the continent, all in the same stubborn little plant his grandmother knew by heart. If this vault on a farm somewhere in this country, someone is spraying a plant to kill it, and in a health food store across town, someone else is paying good money for a bottle of capsules made from that same plant's root. Neither of them knows about the other. That root grows deep and spindle-shaped, brown on the outside, and a startling bright yellow the moment you cut it open. For more than 100 years, American doctors prescribed it by name. It was listed in the official United States Pharmacopoeia, the register of medicines every druggist was expected to stock. They reached for it when a patient came in pale, exhausted, and short of breath. The same tiredness that sends people today to the supplement aisle for a bottle of iron pills. So how does one plant end up on a doctor's shelf and a herbicide label at the same time? The root is called yellow dock, Rumex crispus. This story does not begin in a pasture. It begins on a pharmacist's shelf, in an age when the line between a garden and a medicine cabinet was a great deal thinner than it is today. In 1890, the root of Rumex crispus was entered into the United States Pharmacopoeia. This was not folk hearsay passed around a campfire. It was on the books. An official American medicine. 8 years later, in 1898, 2 of the most respected medical botanists of the era, Harvey Wicks Felter and John Uri Lloyd, wrote the plant up in King's American Dispensatory. They described the root as a gentle but persistent tonic, with a particular pull toward the liver and the digestive organs. Decades before that, in 1869, the physician William Cook had already placed it in his physiomedical dispensatory and called it one of the best of its entire class. And what class was that? The old physicians used a phrase you almost never hear anymore. They called yellow dock a blood builder. When someone came in with the pale skin, the low energy, the breathlessness halfway up the stairs, they did not yet have a modern blood test to point at. They called the condition chlorosis, the green sickness. The dock root was one of the first things they reached for. For the country doctor, a steady course of it taken with meals was a standard answer. We have a plainer name for most of what they were describing now: iron deficiency anemia. As late as 1918, the dispensatory of the United States was still calling the powdered root a valuable iron medicine, given right at mealtimes. Picture that. A plant a modern farmer sprays without a second thought once held a formal entry in the same reference book that governed the nation's pharmacies. That standing felt permanent at the time. It wasn't. The same root a country doctor once kept within arm's reach was about to be reclassified as something to exterminate. Yellow dock did not arrive in America on purpose. It most likely crossed the Atlantic in the 1600s, mixed into the crop seed and cattle feed the British carried to New England. From there, it spread to every state and every Canadian province until it became one of the most widely distributed plants of its kind on the planet. Its seeds can lie dormant in the soil for as long as 80 years and still sprout. A plant that's stubborn, growing thick in pastures and hayfields, was bound to make enemies. To a rancher, it is competition, crowding out the grass that cattle actually graze, and in large amounts its leaves can sicken livestock. So an entire control industry grew up around getting rid of it. Today, curly dock appears on the official noxious plant lists of Michigan, Indiana, Iowa, and Minnesota. Agricultural extension offices publish step-by-step guides for wiping it out. Walk into any farm supply store and you will find the chemicals built to do exactly that. The herbicide 2,4-D dicamba blends sold under names like Weedmaster, glyphosate, metsulfuron products, most of them listing curly dock by name on the label. Now hold those two facts side by side. The same root being sprayed off the back 40 is dried, powdered, and sold in capsules in the health aisle for your money. You can order yellow dock root by the bottle this afternoon. The living plant that makes it for free is treated as a threat to be eliminated. You pay for the thing you are paying to kill. You would think more people would have noticed the contradiction. For the most part, nobody did. So that is the suppression story, clean and simple. Except it is not that simple. And the part that complicates it turns out to be the most interesting part of all. In the late 1990s, two researchers in New Zealand, the herbalist Isla Burgess and a physician named Nikki Bailey, decided to actually test the claim that everyone kept repeating. They ran a 10-week trial with 49 people, comparing several traditional iron tonics and measuring real blood markers like hemoglobin and ferritin. One of the things they tested was a standard commercial extract of yellow dock root. The result was not what the textbooks promised. The dock extract, taken on its own, did not lift people's iron markers. And when that extract was sent off to be analyzed, it contained no measurable iron at all. People thought they had the full picture of this plant. They were wrong. The root that built its entire reputation on building blood was, in that particular form, delivering almost none of it. Sit with that for a second. The reputation was real. The official listings were real. And yet the bottle on the shelf could be all but empty of the one thing everyone bought it for. But the same study held the answer, sitting right next to the failure. The protocols that did raise people's iron were the ones that included blackstrap molasses, and dock root combined with molasses worked better than the molasses on its own. That single detail unlocks everything. The modern product that failed was an alcohol extract, a tincture. Minerals like iron do not dissolve well into alcohol. They dissolve into water, into vinegar, and into syrup. The old physicians knew this in practice long before anyone could explain the chemistry. They never handed you a dropper bottle. They gave the whole powdered root at meal times, or simmered it for hours into a thick decoction, or cooked it down with molasses into an iron syrup you took by the spoonful. Change the form, and you change the result. And the whole root really is mineral-rich when you use all of it. In 2019, a team led by Anthony Afolayan at the University of Fort Hare published a full breakdown of Rumex crispus in the journal Plants, confirming that the root and the leaf carry iron alongside calcium, magnesium, zinc, and a stack of other minerals the plant draws up out of the soil. The same study measured the catch. The plant also holds tannins and oxalates that can bind iron in the gut, which is exactly why the old preparations leaned on sour, vitamin C-rich pairings and warned against eating piles of the raw leaf. So the blood builder was never a single hidden megadose of iron tucked inside a stalk. It was a whole plant tonic, a bitter root that nudges the liver and the gut into pulling more out of the food you already eat, prepared in a form that let those minerals come along for the ride. Strip it down to a convenient tincture, or to one isolated iron salt pressed into a pill, and you throw away the very thing that made the old remedy work. So if you would rather meet this plant than poison it, here is what to look for. Through summer and fall, yellow dock throws up a stalk 2 to 4 feet tall, crowned with dense clusters of small green flowers that ripen into rust-brown, papery seeds. Those seed stalks turn a deep reddish bronze and stand stiff all winter, which makes them easy to spot along roadsides, fence lines, ditches, and the edges of fields long after everything around them has died back. The leaves are long and narrow with distinctly wavy, curled margins, and that curl is where the name curly dock comes from. Dig at the base and you will find the deep, spindle-shaped taproot, brown on the outside and bright yellow within. The root is the medicine, and the root is naturally low in oxalates, so it is the part to work with. Harvest it in the fall once the plant has gone to seed. Scrub it, then either dry and powder it, simmer it into a decoction, or cook it down with blackstrap molasses into the old iron syrup. The young leaves are edible too, but they carry oxalic acid, so they are taken small, young, and cooked, the way you would treat spinach. Never by the bowlful raw. Now picture that can of pasture spray one more time, with curly dock printed right there on the label as a target. The plant it was built to destroy was once official American medicine, the root a country doctor reached for when you walked in tired and pale. It still grows for free in the ditch behind your house. The only thing that ever really changed is who learned how to sell you the bottle. If this is a century, one plant has been blamed for a crime it is physically incapable of committing. It is one of the most respected urinary and anti-inflammatory medicines in the European pharmacy, recognized by name on official government monographs. And in America, that same plant gets torn out of the ground every fall, blamed for the sneezing and the watering eyes of an entire season. Both of those things are true at the same time. That is the mystery. You look out at a field in late September, you see a blaze of bright yellow flowers swaying along the roadside, and your eyes start to water. The sneezing starts. The stuffy mornings, the reach for the tissues and the antihistamines. And you do what people have done for generations. You blame the gold. But here is the biological problem with that verdict. The pollen on those golden flowers is too heavy to fly. It is coarse, it is sticky, and it falls straight to the ground. It cannot ride the wind to your nose, no matter how much of it is blooming. The plant Europe keeps on the pharmacy shelf is the same plant America treats as a nuisance. Its name is goldenrod, and almost everything you were taught about it is backwards. This story does not start with the sneezing. It starts with two plants that grow side by side in the same fields, bloom at the same time, and look nothing alike. From August until the first frost, they come up together across almost every state in the country. One of them is impossible to miss. It throws up tall plumes of brilliant gold, the kind of color that stops you on a quiet country road. The other one is easy to walk right past. It has no petals, no color, no scent worth noticing. Just plain green spikes that disappear into the brush at the edge of the lot. So when your eyes started itching every September, you went looking for a suspect. And you arrested the only one you could see. The bright one. The obvious one. The one standing tall in the open. For decades, nobody corrected the record. The gold took the blame, and the plain green stalk beside it was never even questioned. Here is the botanical truth that should have cleared its name a century ago. There are two ways a flowering plant moves its pollen. Some plants hand it off to insects. Some plants throw it to the wind. A wind-pollinated plant has to gamble. It releases millions of grains into the open air and hopes a few of them land where they need to. Most never do. They land on cars, on windowsills, in our eyes and in our noses. The insect-pollinated plant plays a different game. It does not need to flood the air because it has couriers, so it grows showy, colorful, fragrant flowers to attract them. And it makes its pollen large, heavy, and sticky on purpose, built to cling to the legs of a bee rather than to float. That is exactly what our golden suspect is. Walk up to it on a warm afternoon and you will see the truth for yourself. The blossoms are crawling with life. Honeybees, native bees, wasps, beetles, and butterflies move from flower to flower, carrying the pollen the way the plant intended. University of Delaware entomologist Doug Tallamy has documented that goldenrod feeds more than 115 species of butterflies and moths in the mid-Atlantic alone, and that at least 11 native bee species rely on it specifically. In the fall, migrating monarch butterflies depend on it to fuel the long flight south. A plant this loaded with heavy insect-carried pollen does not fill the air with anything. It cannot. The grains are simply too big to lift. So if the gold is innocent, who has been making you miserable every fall? Look back at that drab green plant standing a few feet away. That is ragweed. And it is everything goldenrod is not. Ragweed does not bother with petals or nectar because it is not trying to attract anything. It throws its pollen straight to the wind. A single ragweed plant can release as many as 1 billion pollen grains in one season. Those grains are tiny, dry, and so light that they have been measured drifting up to 400 miles from where they started. And it blooms on the very same calendar as goldenrod, August to frost. That is the whole trick of it. The guilty plant and the innocent one stand in the same field on the same days, and only one of them fades into the background. Ragweed is the reason that, by the count of the Centers for Disease Control, as many as 60 million Americans suffer through hay fever every year. Every autumn, university extension officers and master gardeners across the country publish the same correction, almost word for word. Do not blame the goldenrod. Blame the ragweed. And every autumn, the myth wins anyway. It was standing there the whole time. Nobody was looking at it. But the real injustice is not just that goldenrod took the blame. It is what we threw away when we believed it. Remember that pharmacy shelf? Here is what is actually on it. The dried flowering tops of goldenrod carry an official herbal monograph from the European Medicines Agency, filed under urinary tract disorders. Germany's Commission E, the expert panel that evaluates herbal medicines, approves it for flushing the urinary tract, for inflammation, and for the gravel that can build toward kidney stones. The European Scientific Cooperative on Phytotherapy lists the same uses, including as a support alongside treatment for bladder infections. The way it works has a name. Goldenrod is what researchers call an aquaretic. It gently increases the flow of urine and the blood flow through the kidneys, without stripping out the sodium and potassium that many ordinary water pills pull from the body. And this is not only old tradition. In a study summarized in the European Medicines Agency's own assessment, 53 patients with inflamed urinary tracts were given a goldenrod extract, and close to 65% of them improved. Doctors were prescribing it for the kidneys and the bladder as far back as the 1200s, when the physician Arnold of Villanova wrote it into his medical texts. Modern reviews describe a long list of measured effects, among them anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antispasmodic, and antibacterial. Its Old English name was woundwort because it was packed onto cuts and sores. The Latin name, Solidago, comes from a word that means to make whole. A plant we now pull up and toss in the yard waste was, for most of recorded history, the thing you took to feel better. So think about what the mix-up actually cost. Every fall, people look at that brilliant gold along the fence line and reach for the shovel. They tear it out of gardens and spray it on roadsides, certain they are removing the thing that makes them sneeze. There are more than 100 species of goldenrod native to North America, blooming from late summer into fall, when almost nothing else is left for the bees. It is one of the most valuable late-season plants on the entire continent for wildlife, and we have spent a century treating one of the oldest medicines on this land like litter to punish it for ragweed's work. Walk into a pharmacy in Germany or France, and you can still buy goldenrod, standardized and sitting on the shelf, sold for exactly what it has always done. Walk down an American roadside, and you will see it treated like a mistake. Somebody forgot to clean up. The same plant. Two completely different verdicts. One country kept the knowledge, the other kept the myth. This is the unsettling thing about a false accusation. It does not take a villain, and it does not take a cover-up. All it takes is one plant that is easy to see, and one plant that is easy to ignore, blooming on the same day. We blamed the one in front of us because blaming it felt obvious. And once a story like that takes hold, it gets repeated at every kitchen table and every garden center until it simply becomes true. The pollen never changed, the plant never changed, only the story we told about it did. Goldenrod was never guilty of a single sneeze. It just had the bad luck to be beautiful and to bloom next to the real thing. Walk any damp eastern trail this summer, and you pass two plants growing side by side. One leaves your skin blistered and itching for a week. The other, right next to it, was used for centuries to make that itch stop. Most people walk past it anyway, heading home to a miserable week of calamine and oatmeal baths. The native tribes who lived here did not. They snapped the stem, rubbed the cool juice on the skin, and the itch backed off. It grows out there for free, right beside the thing that burns you. So why were we taught to forget it? The plant is called jewelweed. If you have walked any wet trail in the eastern half of North America in late summer, you have almost certainly stepped over it without a second look. It stands about 2 to 5 feet tall, with soft, translucent stems that look almost too juicy to be real, and a small, trumpet-shaped flower in orange or pale yellow hanging off a thin, curled stalk. Pinch a stem, and it gives way at once, wet and green and cool against your fingers. The old country names tell you what people used it for. Touch me not, for the seed pods that burst at the lightest brush. Snapweed, for the way the stem breaks open in your hand. And in a lot of backwoods households, it had no fancy name at all. It was just the green stuff you rubbed on after you walked through the wrong patch of leaves. This is where it gets strange. Jewelweed likes the same ground poison ivy likes. Wet woodland borders, the shaded lip of a riverbank, the low, damp ditch running along a country road. The botanists who have studied both plants keep landing on the same observation. Where you find the one, you very often find the other, sometimes tangled into the same stretch of shade with their leaves overlapping. The rash and the relief growing side by side in the same wet dirt. Often a single patch of shade holds both, so the walk that presses poison ivy oil onto a sleeve passes within arm's reach of the remedy 2 steps later. For someone walking these woods 200 years ago, that was not a curiosity. It was practically a map. The plant that hurt you and the plant that soothed you stood in the same place, at the same time of year, and only one of them was soft enough to crush in a bare fist. The practice itself shows up again and again in the records of Native American plant medicine across the eastern tribes. You would gather a handful of jewelweed stems, the juicier the better, mash them between your palms until the green sap ran, and wipe that straight onto the skin that had just brushed the poison ivy. The same sap went on nettle stings, insect bites, and minor scrapes, anywhere the skin was hot and angry. Some people simmered the whole plant down into a dark tea and froze it in cubes to carry the remedy through the winter. Settlers learned the trick from the tribes they lived alongside, and jewelweed worked its way into homemade salves and the back pages of old farm almanacs. For generations, it was simply common knowledge, the kind of thing a grandmother pointed out at the creek. Used soon after contact, the cool sap pulled the heat and the itch straight out of the skin. So the fair question is whether any of that holds up under real testing, or whether it is just an old folk story people wanted to be true. The honest answer turns out to be more interesting than a clean yes or no. When researchers finally tested it, fresh jewelweed, mashed straight from the living stem, did bring poison ivy rash down in a controlled trial. The bottled jewelweed extracts, the kind sold today as a spray or a bar of soap, mostly did no better than plain soap. Those 2 results point at the same simple thing. The effect came down to something far simpler than a hidden compound. The sap behaves like soap, lifting the poison ivy oil off the skin before it can soak in and trigger the reaction. That oil even has a name, urushiol, and it is the entire problem. Get it off the skin quickly, and there is far less rash left to fight. That also explains a puzzle that tripped up some of the early studies. Urushiol starts bonding to skin within minutes of contact. When researchers waited and dabbed a weak extract on long after the oil had already locked in, it did almost nothing, and the plant got written off as a myth. The people who actually relied on it were never waiting. They wiped the fresh sap on within minutes, out in the field, while the oil could still be carried away. Fairly judged, Jewelweed earns its keep right after contact, as the first thing reached for before the rash has a chance to set. Smeared on a 3-day-old blister, long after the oil has done its damage, it has little left to offer. As a free, fast way to rinse poison ivy oil off the skin in the field, it earns the reputation it carried for centuries. Which raises the harder question. If a plant growing free in almost every wet ditch can take the sting out of one of the most common rashes in the country, why is it not the first thing anyone reaches for? Why did it slide out of the medicine cabinet and almost out of memory altogether? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is the simple arithmetic of what can be sold. Calamine lotion and hydrocortisone cream are cheap to manufacture. They sit on a shelf for years without spoiling. They arrive in a clean labeled bottle, and a company can stamp its name on them. Jewelweed can do none of that. It is a wild annual that wilts within a day of being picked. It cannot be standardized into a pill, it cannot be patented, and it cannot be shipped to 10,000 pharmacies in identical containers. A remedy that grows for nothing and dies in your pocket is worth almost nothing to anyone trying to build a business on it. So the bottle got the shelf space, the advertising, and the doctor's quick recommendation. The plant got mowed down at the edge of the parking lot. Nobody ever had to hide jewelweed. The market simply had no reason to keep reminding us it was there. Finding this one is the easy part. Jewelweed is not rare, and it is not hard to spot once the shape is familiar. From about midsummer onward, it crowds along shaded creek banks, damp trail edges, and the low, wet ground where the soil never quite dries out. The giveaway is that 2 to 5 foot stand of soft, almost see-through stems, with the little orange or yellow trumpets dangling on thin stalks. Hold a leaf under water, and it turns bright silver. And very often the poison ivy is right there beside it, 3 glossy leaves climbing the same bank. The traditional method was about as simple as medicine ever got. A fistful of juicy stems, crushed until the sap ran thick and green, wiped over the skin that touched the poison ivy, then rinsed with whatever water was at hand. The sooner after contact, the better it held up. That was the whole of it, done at the edge of a field with nothing bought and nothing labeled. One honest caution belongs in here. Jewelweed was always meant for the ordinary, maddening poison ivy itch. A severe reaction, the kind that spreads across the body, swells the face, reaches the eyes, or tightens the breathing, was never a job for a plant pulled from a ditch. That is a doctor, and sometimes an emergency room. Remembering the free remedy is not the same as ignoring the dangerous version of the problem. But for the everyday case, the itching forearm after a long afternoon in the woods, the answer had been sitting in the ditch the entire time. It grows right out in the open, every single summer, often taller and brighter than the poison ivy it leans against, practically waiting to be noticed. The only thing that ever went missing was our reason to look for it. So the next time you catch those little orange trumpets nodding over a wet bank, you will know what you are looking at. The oldest poison ivy remedy on the continent, still growing for free, right where it has always stood. There is a small brown bottle in nearly every American bathroom. It costs about $4. Your mother kept one on the shelf. Your grandmother kept one too. And you have probably dabbed it on a scrape or an insect bite a dozen times without once stopping to wonder where it came from. What almost no one realizes is that the plant inside that bottle grows wild and free across half of this country. It is a scraggly little shrub you have walked right past in the woods without a second glance. And the stranger part is this. The cheap bottle on your shelf is missing the one thing that made the plant worth using in the first place, and no one ever put that on the label. Picture a forest in New England in late autumn. The oaks have dropped their leaves. The maples have gone bare and brown. And one shrub is doing something no other plant in North America dares to do. It is blooming. Thin, ribbon-like yellow flowers, opening in October and November, right when everything around them is shutting down for the winter. When its seed pods finally dry, they split open and fire their seeds as far as 30 feet across the forest floor, like tiny cannons going off in the cold. This is witch hazel. The early colonists found it almost eerie. The name has nothing to do with witches. It comes from an Old English word, witch, meaning a branch that bends, because settlers cut the forked limbs and used them as dowsing rods to search for water underground. But long before any colonist arrived, the native peoples of the eastern woodlands already knew exactly what this shrub could do. They cut the bark and the young twigs, simmered them in water, and pressed the dark liquid onto cuts, onto bruises, onto sore muscles, onto swelling and insect bites. The Oneida, the Mohegan, and dozens of other nations carried this knowledge for generations. And the medicine was real. The active compounds are called tannins, natural astringents that live in the bark and the twigs. Tannins gently tighten and calm irritated skin. That is not folklore, that is chemistry. By the 1840s, that knowledge reached a pharmacist named Theron Pond. In 1843, Pond was running a modest shop in Utica, New York, when he grew friendly with a medicine man from the nearby Oneida Nation. The Oneida man showed him how to make the old remedy from witch hazel bark. Pond was captivated. He spent the next few years refining it into a stable liquid, and in 1846 he began selling it under the name Golden Treasure, promoted for burns, bruises, sprains, sore throats, and insect stings. People loved it. But here is the detail that got lost along the way. The remedy was never Pond's invention. It was Oneida knowledge, handed to him freely. Pond's name went on the bottle. The name of the Oneida healer who taught him was never written down. We do not know it to this day. Think about that for a moment. A remedy that would one day build a global brand, and we cannot name the person who gave it away. Pond died in 1852. The company he started did not. It grew into the Pond's Extract Company, then simply Pond's, the cold cream and beauty brand your mother likely kept on her dresser. Today, Pond's belongs to Unilever, one of the largest consumer goods companies on Earth, sold in shops on nearly every continent. All of it traces back to a remedy an Oneida healer once shared with a shopkeeper in upstate New York. Connecticut, 1866. A minister named Thomas Newton Dickinson looked at that humble shrub and saw an industry. Dickinson opened a distillery in the town of Essex and began boiling witch hazel twigs on a scale no one had attempted before. Within a few years, he had nearly 10 production sites scattered across the state. When Dickinson died, his two sons split the business in half and promptly turned on each other. They built two rival companies, both called Dickinson's Witch Hazel, one in Essex and one in East Hampton, feuding for decades over the family name. Nothing sells a product quite like two branches of the same family refusing to speak to one another. The plant became so famous that in 1916, Thomas Edison himself sent a letter to the Dickinson Company recommending a man for a job. By the 1980s, even the famous Dickinson name had slipped out of the family's hands. One branch was sold to investors, then to a German pharmaceutical company called Merz, which moved most of the operation south to North Carolina. The old Essex distillery shut its doors in 1997. Nearly all the witch hazel you can buy today comes from one place. One plant in East Hampton, Connecticut, called American Distilling, is now the only large commercial supplier left anywhere in the world. It runs around the clock, every single day of the year, with 10 stills feeding 10 tanks that hold 25,000 gallons each. Crews still walk the Connecticut woods cutting wild witch hazel brush by hand, just as they did 100 years ago. One corner of New England now supplies the entire planet. And here is where the story turns. The version you have heard, the one printed on the label, is not the full picture. The process that made witch hazel cheap and easy to bottle was leaving its most useful ingredient behind. When Dickinson and the others industrialized witch hazel, they made it by steam distillation. They steam the twigs and the bark, capture the vapor, and bottle the clear liquid that condenses out of it. It is shelf-stable. It smells clean. It pours like water. Pay attention to this next part, because it explains everything you think you know about that bottle. The tannins, the actual active compound, the thing that makes witch hazel do anything at all, do not travel with the steam. They stay behind in the leftover plant material. So the witch hazel water you pour out contains almost no tannins. What gives the drugstore version its tightening, astringent sting is mostly the alcohol added as a preservative, usually around 14%. In plain terms, the famous astringent is doing its job largely because it is alcohol, not because it is witch hazel. One man saw this coming all the way back in 1850. A maker named Henry Thayer refused to distill the plant at all. He understood that distillation stripped out the very compounds that made witch hazel worth using, so he prepared his extract a different way to keep the tannins in. That looked like a small, stubborn choice at the time. It wasn't. More than 170 years later, his name is still on the witch hazel that actually holds on to its active ingredients. None of this was ever a secret. The United States Pharmacopoeia, the official body that sets drug ingredient standards in this country, even places a limit on how much tannin a witch hazel product is allowed to contain, because too much can irritate the skin. Witch hazel is still one of the very few plant remedies the government officially recognizes as an over-the-counter drug. The irony is that the version on the shelf is the stripped-down one. The real medicine was always in the bark. The industry simply built itself around the watered-down version, and most people never knew there was a difference. So what did we actually lose? Not the plant. The plant never went anywhere. Witch hazel still grows wild across more than 20 states, from Maine down to Georgia and west toward the Mississippi River. It is one of the easiest shrubs in the eastern woods to recognize once you know the trick. Look for broad, oval leaves with wavy, scalloped edges, and look for the one shrub still in flower in late fall, with thin yellow ribbons for petals. The old way was simple, and it is the way the Oneida taught Theron Pond before any of this became a business. You take the bark and the young twigs, and you simmer them gently in water to draw the tannins out. What you get is a dark, mild astringent you can cool and dab on minor skin irritation, on bruises, on insect bites, as people on this continent have for hundreds of years. No distillery and no brand name, just the shrub and a pot of water, the way your great-grandmother might have done it. So go back to that small brown bottle in your bathroom. It still has its uses, but it is a faint echo of something much older and much richer, a remedy an Oneida healer once gave away for free, repackaged and thinned down until the original was forgotten. The shrub is still out there, blooming every November while the rest of the forest sleeps. Every year, Americans pour more than $2 billion onto their lawns to destroy the plants growing in them. Herbicides, selective sprays, pre-emergent treatments, all of it aimed at the green things that dare to grow where they were not specifically invited. And every year, in the exact same country, infections that no antibiotic can stop claim more lives than they did the year before. Today, 1.3 million deaths a year trace directly to bacteria that have learned to shrug off our strongest drugs. That is more than HIV, more than malaria. The deadliest of them all is one doctor's name with a kind of dread, MRSA. And right now, it is winning. Hold those two facts next to each other for a second, because almost nobody does. We are spending an absolute fortune to eradicate a specific category of plant. And inside the leaves of one of those plants is some of the most highly studied natural defense against the exact bacteria that is currently killing us. This is not folklore. This is documented in peer-reviewed laboratories. There is one plant in particular growing right now within a few feet of most front doors in America. Researchers have tested it against drug-resistant staph and watched it heal an infected wound. Yet people have been pulling it out of the ground in absolute frustration for 1,000 years. The ancient Saxons believed it was worth protecting. It turns out they were onto something we are only now confirming. You know this plant. You have almost certainly cursed at it. It spreads by runners that creep along the soil and root at every single node, so when you pull one strand, you leave behind 10 more. It survives frost. It survives drought. It survives the chemical assault you throw at it and comes back the next spring like absolutely nothing happened. The archive opens on Glaucoma hederacea. Most people know it as creeping Charlie, or ground ivy, or gill over the ground. But its oldest name tells the real story. Alehof. That name is a clue, and it points to a historical crime that happened in the year 1516. But first, the plant itself. Its medicinal record is not vague. It is filled with specific names and exact dates. Galen, the Greek physician whose work shaped medicine for 1,000 years, recommended it for inflammation. Hildegard of Bingen, the German abbess and healer, recorded its use for ringing in the ears back in the 12th century. In 1597, the English herbalist John Gerard wrote it into his massive medical text, calling it a tonic, an astringent, and a gentle stimulant. By the early 1800s, American settler physicians had carried it across the ocean and were using it for so many things that in England it was simply called a cure-all. Then it fell out of the books. Not because it stopped working, because something replaced it, and that something could be controlled. To understand that, you have to understand the name Alehof. For thousands of years, beer was not made with hops. Ale was bittered and preserved with a mixture of herbs called gruit, and one of the most common herbs in that mixture was this exact plant. It clarified the beer. It preserved it. It flavored it. The Saxons brewed with it, the English brewed with it, and the names stuck. Alehof, Tunhoof, gill over the ground. All of them brewing words for a brewing herb. Here is where the history turns. The right to sell gruit was not free. In much of Northern Europe, brewing was a strict monopoly. The Gruitrecht, held by the church, by bishops, and by the nobility, who ran licensed gruit houses and aggressively taxed every single batch. The herbs were the product, and the product was controlled. Hops were different. Hops were a cultivated crop. You could grow them on a massive farm, count them, regulate them, and tax them at the point of production. A wild herb that anyone could pick for free from a meadow could not be taxed the same way. So when the rulers of Bavaria passed their famous purity law in 1516, restricting beer to only water, barley, and hops, they did something that sounded like quality control, but worked like a corporate takeover. They legislated an ancient herbal tradition completely out of existence. A free herb the common people grew themselves was permanently replaced by a crop the powerful could own. That was round one. The plant survived it, of course. It always does. But the human knowledge started to thin. Now, the part the modern laboratories are finally confirming. The leaves of this plant contain ursolic acid and rosmarinic acid, compounds that show massive antibacterial activity in study after study. In 2023, researchers ran the plant through detailed chemical analysis, isolated the ursolic acid, and tested the extract against multi-drug-resistant clinical samples of Staphylococcus aureus, the exact bacterial family that includes MRSA. It suppressed them. Then they took it further, into an animal model. An extract gel was applied to an infected wound. It brought the bacterial load down compared to a standard pharmacy ointment, and the wound completely closed, with new skin and new hair, inside of 10 days. This is a laboratory and an animal result. It is not yet a human trial. Anyone who tells you this is a proven pharmaceutical cure is getting ahead of the science. But the trajectory is undeniably consistent across centuries of traditional use and across modern study, and it points directly at the exact problem keeping infectious disease doctors up at night. But here is the most important detail in this entire archive. When modern scientists first tested industrial preparations of this plant, the standardized tinctures manufactured for a long shelf life, some of them came back showing almost nothing, completely inactive. And that is exactly how a real medicine gets dismissed as a peasant superstition. You test it wrong, you get nothing, and you write it off. These compounds are incredibly fragile. The triterpenes that actually matter are barely soluble in water, so a quick cup of hot tea pulls out almost none of them. High heat chemically degrades the delicate parts. The old healers knew to prepare it cold, or extract it in fat, or in alcohol. Not because they understood the microscopic chemistry, but because 1,000 years of quiet observation had taught them exactly what worked. Modern medicine forgot the preparation, tested the wrong version, and confidently concluded the plant was nothing. The plant was never nothing. The knowledge of how to use it was what we lost. Which brings the story all the way home, to your own lawn. This plant is still being aggressively targeted right now. There has been no real biological control research from the United States Department of Agriculture. The official answer to ground ivy is simply chemical, the exact same herbicide names sitting on the shelf at every garden store. The herb the Saxons protected and brewed and healed with is, in modern America, just a line item on a plastic bottle of weed killer. There is a terrifying, strange symmetry to it. A plant we cannot kill, that survives absolutely everything, sitting quietly in the cracks of the sidewalk. While the bacteria we are desperately trying to kill learns to survive everything we have, one of them has been on our side the entire time. The plant does not need you to water it, feed it, or protect it. It has handled all of that entirely on its own for centuries. It only needs one thing from you, and it is the easiest thing in the world to give. The next time you reach for the chemical sprayer, walk past it instead, and go look up how the old brewers prepared it cold. That single change is where the lost knowledge starts coming back. If this vault changed how you see the weeds in your own grass, then do not let this knowledge disappear again. In a laboratory today, it acts against strains of a virus that have outlasted the leading prescription drug. It was used as medicine on 3 continents for more than 1,000 years. A Chinese pharmacy still fills prescriptions with it under a name older than the United States. The English gave it 4 names, and every single one of them is a promise. Self-heal, heal all heal, woundwort, and it is almost certainly growing in your lawn right now. What almost no one in America knows is that a century ago, this plant, and nearly every plant like it, was written out of American medicine on purpose, not by accident, by committee, on paper, with signatures. The schools that taught it were shut down. The textbooks that named it were shelved. The doctors who used it were relabeled as quacks. And within a single generation, 1,000 years of human knowledge became a chore you pay a lawn service to handle. This is the story of Self-Heal, the plant that never stopped working. It just stopped being remembered. London, 1597. The English botanist John Gerard sat down to write about the plants of his world. When he reached this one, he made a claim few herbs ever earned from him. For healing wounds, he wrote, there was no better herb in the world. He was not the first to say so, and he was nowhere near the last. Carpenters once kept it in the shop, pressing the crushed leaves onto the cuts they gave themselves with their own tools, which is why one of its oldest names is simply carpenter's herb. The botanical name, Prunella, comes from a German word for a brutal infection of the mouth and throat. The plant earned that title by being the thing people reached for when their throat closed up. On the other side of the world, in the herb shops of China, the same plant has been weighed out and sold for centuries under the name Kyo, brewed into cooling teas and eaten as a green vegetable. Native peoples across North America used it too. 3 continents, separated by vast oceans and languages, all looking at the same small purple flower and arriving at the same conclusion. This one matters, and you have almost certainly walked right past it. It is a low plant with a square stem and a stubby spike of small purple flowers. It turns up in lawns, along paths, and in the cracked edges of fields. Most people who see it call it a weed. Most people who have heard its name have no idea they are looking at it. For most of the 20th century, that 1,000-year record sat quietly, filed away as peasant folklore. Then the modern laboratories caught up. In 2004, a team of researchers publishing in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology took a fraction drawn from Self-Heal and tested it against herpes simplex, both type 1 and type 2, in infected cells. The plant compound cut the virus down. The amount needed to halve it was strikingly small, around 20 micrograms per milliliter. That alone was interesting. But here is the detail almost everyone missed. The standard prescription drug for herpes is acyclovir. Over the years, certain strains of the virus have learned to survive it. Doctors call them acyclovir resistant, and they are a real and growing problem because when that drug stops working, the medicine cabinet runs out of answers. The Self-Heal extract worked on those resistant strains too. Think about that for a second. A plant from the lawn acted on the strains that have already beaten the pharmacy. In 2024, researchers writing in the journal Chinese Medicine traced how it does this. The plant compound appears to block the virus from latching onto the cell in the first place, and it quiets an inflammatory pathway the virus relies on to survive. It is not magic. It is cellular mechanism. And this is not only a story about cells in a glass dish. As far back as 1990, a clinical report described 78 people with a herpes infection of the eye, treated with drops made from this plant. 38 were cured. 37 improved. Only 3 did not respond. Out of 78 people, 75 got measurably better. You would think a result like that would sit on every doctor's shelf in America. It does not. And the reason why is the real story of this archive. Cincinnati, Ohio, 1939. In a brick building that had trained American physicians for nearly 100 years, the eclectic medical institute graduated its final class. 3 years later, in 1942, it surrendered its charter and locked its heavy doors for the last time. The eclectics were not fringe. They were a serious American school of medicine built on botanical remedies, blending European folk practice with Native American knowledge. Their leading doctors compiled one of the most complete records of American plant medicine ever assembled, a massive volume called King's American Dispensatory. The 1898 edition ran to thousands of plant entries. Self-Heal lived inside that world. So how does a 100-year-old school of medicine simply die? It started with a single report, and at the time, it was sold to the public as a necessary reform. The Flexner Report, 1910. It was written by Abraham Flexner, an educator who had never practiced a day of medicine in his life, and it was funded by the Carnegie Foundation. Flexner traveled the country and inspected more than 150 medical schools, judging every one of them against a single rigid model: laboratory science, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. A school that taught plant medicine, or water cures, or homeopathy did not fit that model, and Flexner said so in plain, punishing language. Plant medicine, water cures, homeopathy, any of it was outside the model he described. He did not work alone. The American Medical Association had created its Council on Medical Education back in 1904. Historians who have studied the period have documented that the AMA had a clear financial reason to want fewer doctors competing for paying patients. The report gave the standardizing machinery exactly the weapon it needed. What followed was not subtle. Nearly half the medical schools in America closed or merged within a few decades. The botanical schools could not afford the expensive new requirements, and more to the point, they did not fit the new, officially sanctioned definition of medicine. By the 1930s, only a handful were left. The Eclectic Institute in Cincinnati held on the longest. And then it too was gone. But this was never really about one school in Ohio. When those doors closed, an entire American pharmacopoeia closed with them. The plants were not disproven. They were delisted, written out of the curriculum, out of the textbooks, and out of the training a young doctor would ever receive. It was not a smoky conspiracy with one villain in one room. It was something quieter and far more permanent. A standard written down in ink that had no column for a wild plant. And here is where it reaches you directly. Self-Heal still grows in American lawns from coast to coast, and every summer millions of people mow it, pull it, and spray it as a nuisance. The plant the English literally called heal all, you now pay a chemical service to remove. But the plant never read the report. It kept coming up in the same fields and the same lawns year after year, doing exactly what it has always done. Waiting, the way these plants always seem to wait, for someone to look down and finally recognize it. So learn to see it. It grows low to the ground with a square stem because it belongs to the mint family. Its leaves grow in opposite pairs, and its flowers gather into a short, blunt spike of small, purple, hooded blooms all through the summer. Once you have really looked at that flower spike, you will never again mistake it for grass. The traditional use is simple. The leaves, stems, and flowers are gathered, dried, and brewed into a tea, or steeped stronger and used as a gargle for a sore throat. The same use that gave the plant its oldest names. One honest caution. Self-Heal draws up whatever is in the soil it grows in, so gather it only from clean ground that has never been sprayed. You do not need a prescription to walk into your own front yard. You do not need anyone's permission to learn the name of a plant that has been standing there the whole time, in plain sight, while the report that wrote it out of the textbooks gathers dust. If this vault changed how you see the weeds in your own grass, don't let this knowledge slip away again. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault, and one plant at a time, we will keep bringing back what the textbooks left out.